Hey, good morning to everybody. Happy Friday. It's Daryl here. It's bright and freaking, well, it's not so bright and freaking early. It's 7:30 a.m. here in Connecticut on the East Coast. Okay, if you watched my last video, I was talking about how on Fridays I have a really busy day. But I've been thinking about this story quite a bit, and I wanted to talk about it just a little bit. I am not a mental health professional. I've dealt with different things in my life. I've made some observations. This video is just some opinions and thoughts I have on the story about Pete Davidson putting himself into a rehab, into a mental health facility to get treatment. I believe he deals with borderline personality disorder. To be totally honest with you, I'm not quite sure what that is. And PTSD. And I wanted to just talk about this a little bit and some of the stuff I've dealt with. One of the first things I thought, I was pleasantly surprised when I saw this article. I'll talk about a little more about this, but I was diagnosed with clinical depression, and I wasn't diagnosed with PTSD. This was back in the early, about 2005, but there was a lot of talk about it because of the abuse, the sexual abuse I dealt with when I was 11 to 14 years old. But I was diagnosed with clinical depression, and I took medication for at least a year, it was, I think. And I just want to talk about this a little bit. Like I said, this is just my opinion. I was pleasantly surprised to see Pete Davidson put himself into this rehab. I think this is more an exception, it's more rare that people usually don't figure it out themselves, that they're kind of having a crisis or headed towards a crisis, and they actually take the steps or listen to people in their lives and take the steps to actually put themselves into rehab before it gets out of control. With me and people that were around me, that tended to be more the story. And with me, there was with the stuff like depression and probably the stuff he deals with too, you tend to isolate. And just like with when I was using an addiction, you get this feedback when you isolate. You get the stories you start telling yourself. It starts to get, you start to believe it. And when you isolate, you don't have an objective view. And with me, you start, just like with addiction, you start to blame people that are trying to help you, like the rehab or the medication. You start to actually blame that, like that's actually the problem. Like with me and a lot of other people, you start to believe that the drugs are actually helping you, and it's other things that are causing your problems. It gets twisted around, and until you go into rehab, you start to get an objective. The thing that helped me the most when I went into rehab, it's called dual diagnosis. I was in there for detox and drugs plus depression, and the thing the doctor told me, and I've heard a lot of times since, is when you're in this situation, dual diagnosis, they have to determine which came first. If you started using drugs and that led to a chemical imbalance and that led to depression, or you had depression first and you started to self-medicate and that led to the drugs, the chicken or the egg, which one came first kind of thing. And I've heard that a lot since. One of the things, just saying this, one of the things that helped me the most wasn't the medication, it wasn't actually the rehab, but it was the groups. Being in a group and sitting with other people. When you start to hear other people talk and they have the same stories, the same childhood, you realize you're not alone. That was one of the most comforting things for me, was being in a group, and you don't feel so isolated. I guess people don't realize, like when I talk about depression, like clinical depression, a lot of times you'll see people say that, well, you just feel, everybody's depressed. You just feel bad. Just, stop whining, stop crying. Or, I've heard that before. And people don't realize, I think, that you have the pleasure reward center in your brain. And with drugs, this is a reason why another reason why I never want to use drugs again, because I realize now how the drugs affected the endorphins in my brain. Like with the stimulants, that's where you get the rush, but that's actually just your brain releasing all your endorphins all at once, and then you go into this crash mode where you have no endorphins, where you don't get any pleasure from anything. I think people we tend to forget like that there's these endorphins, these pleasure reward systems in our mind. I mean, you know that with sex, you know, in order to continue the human race, you have this pleasure reward. It feels good. You want to do it. So, you know, as to continue the human race. But you also have that with sleep and with eating. You know, it's a pleasure reward system. And with depression, I was trying to think of a way to describe depression, and I just remember feeling black. You know, everything was just black, and it's, you know, it's nothing like just feeling bad or being upset about something. It's to the point where food just doesn't even look like. I'll tell you in a second something I remembered about food. Or sleep. You don't sleep for days, and things just start to get worse. It's hard to describe it to you when the pleasure reward system in your brain isn't working, and everything just seems so pointless. Food, sleeping, socializing, everything. It's a far cry from just feeling bad or upset. You know, because you hear people say that, just snap out of it. You know, it's just, you know, everybody's kind of down something. It's not like that at all. It's where your brain is actually, you know, you don't feel normal. You're not getting the same drive to eat and sleep and socialize and everything else. Everything just seems pointless, and there's no point to anything, and that's where you start to go over the edge. I remember this is one time, me and my family just talked about this on Mother's Day, because we all remembered this. This was like 20 years, it was about 17 or 18 years ago on Mother's Day. I had just gotten out of rehab, and I was drug-free, but I was still detoxing, and the depression, my endorphins and my chemical balance was way off. And I remember being hesitant to go out to Mother's Day with the rest of my family, because I knew I wasn't feeling right at all. And I remember it was a nice sunny day, and we went to a nice restaurant, and there was people out. There was a big grass field, and people were out playing frisbee and everything else. And I've talked about this before. I feel so disconnected when I was in this state of mind, where I didn't feel like I was part of humanity. Like I didn't feel like I was part of society. It was like watching a movie, but I wasn't part of it. It's one of the scariest, most depressing feelings, and this will lead to other thoughts. But anyway, when I was sitting down, I love steak and I love French fries, and that's what I ordered. And it came, and I like my steak medium rare. I've loved steak my entire life, medium rare steak. One of my favorite meals. But that day, I still remember this. I sat down, and when that meal was placed in front of me, it didn't look like steak to me. It didn't look like food. I swear to God, I still remember this. It didn't look like food to me. It looked like something from a horror film, like Roadkill. I just remember seeing the juice and the red, and my stomach just started turning. I mean, it's hard to describe this to you. This was part of depression with my endorphins. You know, the food didn't even look like food. It looked like something out of a horror movie. I ended up running out of the restaurant, crying, and kind of spoiled that Mother's Day. You know, and now the great thing is now with me, it wasn't actual depression. I started using drugs, and it affected the chemical balance in my brain. And this is one of the main reasons, like I said, that I'll never use again, because I understand now how, especially like with take for instance, using stimulants. It just dumps all the pleasure, your endorphins, and you just crash into this black place. And the more you use, because that's the urge, you have the urge, you're like, okay, I feel like crap. You go up, and then you come down, and then that's when you Jones, they call it, and you want more. And if you do that, you take more, you just go up a little bit, and you go down further, and and the down gets deeper and deeper until you're just in this pit of despair, like you do not feel like doing anything but using more, trying to use that last little bit of endorphins in your brain. You know, and when I realized what I was doing to myself like that, it's like getting paid for the year. Say you got your salary for a whole year, and you got it on one day, and you just took it and you just blew it all in one day. So the rest of the year, you would have no money for anything, for food or lodging or a car. I know this isn't a good analogy, but that's kind of like what it's like. You just spew all the endorphins, and you just end up in this black place. And the urge with addiction is you get the urge to just use more, and it's making things worse when you think it's making it better. And that's why, like, getting help, seeking help, I think is rare. You know, and I was pleasantly surprised to see Pete Davidson take the initiative and seek help before things get out of control, because that's what ends up happening when you tend to isolate yourself, and your thoughts just keep feeding back off each other, and you just start going into like a non-reality. So I am very happy to see, congratulations to Pete Davidson. I hope he does well. I hope other people see this and realize that getting help, talking to somebody about this, and for me especially, sitting in a group and being with other people suffering from the same thing was very comforting, to realize that I wasn't alone. Anyway, rehab, recovery is possible. Have a good Friday.